Throughout history, extraordinary leaders have shaped the destiny of the world. With bold strategies, unwavering courage, and visions that spanned generations, they became immortal legends. But what if you were in command? Which of these leaders matches your ambition and spirit? Based on your profile, who would you be? In this epic video, discover the history, conquests, and secrets of each of these legendary leaders. Prepare for a journey into greatness. The world called them conquerors, visionaries, and kings. And you, who would you be? Imagine commanding 40,000 soldiers in a foreign land, outnumbered 2 to 1, with no reinforcements in sight. That was Julius Caesar in Gaul, 52 BCE. But instead of retreating, he built a wall. Not just any wall, 2 walls. One to trap his enemies, another to protect his back. This impossible strategy won him one of history's greatest victories. But this is just the beginning of how Caesar conquered the known world. Today, we're diving into the military genius of Julius Caesar, and more importantly, what his strategies can teach us about winning our own battles, whether in business, politics, or life. We'll explore 10 key principles that made him history's most successful conqueror. Let's start with Caesar's first rule of conquest. Speed is everything. When Caesar received news of rebellion in Gaul, he didn't wait for spring like other generals. He marched through snow-covered Alps in January, catching his enemies completely off guard. They weren't ready for a Roman army in winter. Who would be? This wasn't just about being fast, it was about being unpredictable. Take the Battle of Dyrrhachium. Caesar's troops were running out of food. Traditional military wisdom said to retreat and resupply. Instead, Caesar launched an immediate attack on Pompey's superior forces. The sheer audacity of the move threw his enemies into confusion. While they were still trying to understand his strategy, Caesar had already secured key positions. This speed became Caesar's trademark. His famous quote, "I came, I saw, I conquered," wasn't just bragging. It was his entire strategy summarized in 5 words. While others planned, Caesar acted. While others waited for perfect conditions, Caesar created them. In the modern world, we'd call this first mover advantage. But here's what most people get wrong about Caesar. He wasn't just fast, he was smart about it. Take the Battle of Pharsalus. Caesar's army was exhausted from marching. Any other general would have rested their troops. Instead, Caesar ordered an immediate attack. Why? Because he knew Pompey's fresh troops were overconfident and undisciplined. Their very advantage became their weakness. This principle still applies today. Just ask any startup that's outmaneuvered a larger, slower competitor. This leads us to Caesar's second rule: turn weaknesses into strengths. During the siege of Alesia, Caesar's army was trapped between 2 enemy forces. A normal general would see this as a disaster. Caesar saw it as an opportunity. He built those 2 walls we mentioned earlier, one facing in, one facing out. This turned his surrounded position into a perfect defensive stronghold. The inner wall, 11 miles long, trapped Vercingetorix and his 80,000 men inside Alesia. The outer wall, 13 miles long, protected against the relief army of 250,000 Gauls. Caesar essentially turned a siege into a fortress. His enemies couldn't coordinate their attacks, and Caesar could respond to threats from either direction. This wasn't just military genius. It was architectural and engineering innovation on an unprecedented scale. Military strategy wasn't just about battles. Caesar mastered psychological warfare long before it had a name. Here's Rule 3. Control the narrative. After crossing the Rubicon, an act of treason, Caesar didn't apologize. Instead, he portrayed himself as the defender of Roman democracy against a corrupt Senate. He wasn't an invader, he was a protector. This mastery of propaganda extended to his written works. His Commentaries on the Gallic War wasn't just a military record. It was carefully crafted political messaging. He wrote about himself in the third person, making his victories seem more objective. He highlighted his clemency toward defeated enemies while downplaying his brutality. In today's terms, Caesar wasn't just winning battles, he was winning the media war. Let's talk about innovation, Caesar's fourth rule. In the siege of Marseille, his army had no naval experience. Did that stop him? He built a fleet from scratch and trained his soldiers to be sailors. When standard tactics didn't work, he invented new ones. He built towers, siege ramps, and engineering works that his enemies had never seen before. His engineers developed the corvus, a boarding bridge with a spike that would lock enemy ships in place. This turned naval battles into infantry engagements, exactly what his land-based troops were good at. He effectively changed the rules of warfare to suit his strengths. Today, we'd call this disruptive innovation. Caesar's fifth rule was perhaps his most powerful. Know what drives people. His soldiers didn't just fight for Rome, they fought for Caesar. Why? Because he fought alongside them. He learned their names. He shared their hardships. When food was scarce, he ate what they ate. When they marched, he marched. During the Battle of Munda, his final major battle, Caesar's troops began to waver. What did he do? He grabbed a shield, ran to the front lines, and shouted, "This will be my last battle." His soldiers rallied instantly. They couldn't bear the thought of their general dying without them. This personal connection created unshakable loyalty. Rule 6. Adapt or die. In Gaul, Caesar faced enemies who excelled at guerrilla warfare. Rather than sticking to traditional Roman tactics, he adapted. He created a combined force of infantry, cavalry, and Germanic auxiliaries that could fight in any terrain against any enemy. He modified Roman equipment to deal with new threats. When Gallic chariots proved effective, he developed specific counterattactics, but Caesar's genius wasn't just in winning battles, it was in winning peace. Rule 7. Victory is more than conquest. After defeating Gaul, he didn't just occupy it, he integrated it. He gave citizenship to Gallic nobles, incorporated their cavalry into his army, and respected their local customs. Within a generation, Gauls were serving in the Roman Senate. This wasn't just enlightened leadership, it was practical strategy. Happy provinces required fewer troops to control. Rule 8. Use success to build more success. Each victory gave Caesar resources for the next campaign. Conquered territories provided troops, supplies, and bases for further expansion. It was a self-reinforcing cycle of conquest. The wealth from Gaul funded his political campaigns in Rome. Military victory brought political power, which brought more military resources. However, Caesar's story also teaches us about the dangers of success. Rule 9. Beware the victory trap. After conquering Gaul, defeating Pompey, and becoming dictator of Rome, Caesar became overconfident. He dismissed warnings about the Ides of March. He forgot that not everyone loved his success. His assassins used his predictable daily routine against him. This brings us to the final and most important rule. Never stop evolving. Caesar's early victories came from being unpredictable, but as he gained power, he became set in his ways. His enemies learned to predict him. On March 15, 44 BCE, that predictability cost him his life. So, what's the real lesson from Caesar's conquest of the world? Is it about military strategy, political maneuvering, leadership? It's all of these, but it's also something more. It's about understanding that success comes from constant adaptation, from turning disadvantages into advantages, and from never ever becoming comfortable with victory. Think about Caesar's principles in modern terms. Speed and surprise. Ask any tech startup. Turning weaknesses into strengths. Look at companies that turned the pandemic into an opportunity for innovation. Controlling the narrative. That's modern public relations. The principles that helped Caesar conquer the known world are the same ones driving success today. Now, here's the question that haunts military historians. If Caesar had lived longer, what would he have conquered next? He was planning a massive campaign against Parthia when he died. Some historians believe he intended to push all the way to India. What could a man who conquered Gaul in 8 years have done with another decade? But perhaps that's not the question we should be asking. Maybe the real question is, what territories, literal or metaphorical, lie unconquered before you? What walls do you need to build? What enemies do you need to turn into allies? How will you use Caesar's principles to conquer your own world? Because in the end, we're all conquerors of our own worlds. The only question is, will you use Caesar's rules to build your empire? And more importantly, once you've built it, will you remember the lessons that got you there? They say it's impossible to conquer the known world in a single lifetime, but what if I told you a 20-year-old did exactly that? In just 1 decade, he built the largest empire humanity had ever seen. This isn't just another story about Alexander the Great. This is the blueprint of how an ambitious young king transformed from a local ruler to history's most legendary conqueror. Welcome to Deep History, where we bring the ancient past to life through stories that reveal the roots of our modern world. The year is 336 BCE. A young Alexander inherits a kingdom in chaos. His father, Philip II of Macedon, lies dead, assassinated at his own daughter's wedding. The surrounding kingdoms smell weakness. They see a boy king, untested and vulnerable. Greece begins to revolt. Persia watches from the east. The vultures are circling. But they made one crucial mistake, underestimating history's most brilliant military mind. Before we dive into Alexander's conquest, you need to understand what made him different. While other princes were learning court etiquette, young Alexander was being trained by none other than Aristotle himself. But it wasn't just philosophy. His education was a perfect storm of military strategy, leadership, and cultural understanding. This wasn't your typical royal education. By age 12, Alexander had already tamed the supposedly untamable horse, Bucephalus, a feat that made seasoned warriors take notice. His father, watching this display of patience and determination, famously declared, "My son, seek out a kingdom equal to yourself. Macedonia has no room for you." His father's assassination taught him the most crucial lesson. Hesitation means death. Within weeks of taking the throne, Alexander moved with shocking speed. He marched south, crushing the Theban revolt so completely that no Greek city-state dared to challenge him again. This wasn't just violence. It was calculated shock and awe. Alexander's success wasn't just about winning battles, it was about winning minds. His 3-part strategy was devastatingly effective. First, speed. His army moved at twice the pace of any other force in the ancient world. While enemies were still gathering intelligence, Alexander was already at their doorstep. His soldiers, called the Silver Shields, could march 50 miles in a single day while carrying 60 pounds of equipment, a feat that would be challenging even for modern armies. Second, innovation. He revolutionized the use of cavalry, turning it from a support unit into the hammer that would shatter enemy lines. The famous companion cavalry became the ancient world's first true shock troops, but it wasn't just about horses. Alexander introduced the sarissa, a pike twice the length of standard spears, giving his infantry an unprecedented advantage in close combat. Third, and most brilliant, cultural integration. Unlike other conquerors who tried to suppress local customs, Alexander adopted them. In Persia, he wore Persian clothes. In Egypt, he honored Egyptian gods. He didn't just conquer territories, he transformed them into willing partners. This wasn't just political correctness, it was genius-level statecraft. The scale of his conquests is almost impossible to grasp. In 334 BCE, he crossed into Asia with 47,000 men, a force that would be considered small by Persian standards. But what happened next defied all military logic. At the Battle of Granicus, he did the unthinkable. While his generals advised caution, Alexander led a cavalry charge across a river, uphill against a superior force. The Persians thought it was suicide. Instead, it became their nightmare. During this battle, Alexander's helmet was split open by a Persian axe. He was inches from death but continued fighting. This moment became legendary among his troops. The siege of Tyre in 332 BCE demonstrated his engineering brilliance. When faced with a city on an island half a mile from shore, he built a causeway through the Mediterranean Sea itself. Modern engineers still study how he accomplished this feat with ancient technology. This wasn't just bravery, it was psychological warfare. Every victory added to his legend. By the time he reached Gaugamela in 331 BCE, Persian forces outnumbered him 5-1, but numbers meant nothing against a legend. His mere presence caused enemy lines to break before the battle even began. But here's what most people don't tell you about Alexander's conquest. It nearly fell apart multiple times. His men mutinied. His childhood friends plotted against him. The strain of maintaining such a massive empire began to show. The execution of Parmenion, his most trusted general, revealed the paranoia that came with absolute power. The burning of Persepolis, one of the ancient world's greatest cities, showed how thin the line was between conquest and destruction. Alexander's drinking became legendary, and not in a good way. During one drunken rage, he killed Clitus, a man who had saved his life in battle. The turning point came in Babylon. Alexander realized that military might alone couldn't hold an empire together. He began a radical experiment, mixing Greek and Persian customs, arranging marriages between his officers and local nobles, and adopting local governing systems. He himself married Roxana, a Bactrian princess, and encouraged 10,000 of his soldiers to take Persian wives. In just 10 years, Alexander had created an empire stretching from Greece to India. But his most lasting achievement wasn't the territory he conquered. It was how he changed the world forever. He created the first truly multicultural empire, spreading Greek culture while embracing local traditions. The trade routes he established would later become the Silk Road. The cities he founded, all 70 of them, most named Alexandria, would become major centers of learning. The most famous, Alexandria in Egypt, housed the greatest library of the ancient world. His conquest spread Greek language and culture across Asia, creating a common tongue that would later help spread Christianity and Islam. Even his military innovations lived on. The Romans would later adopt many of his tactics, particularly his use of cavalry and flexible unit formations. The Byzantine Empire, which lasted until 1453 CE, still used military manuals based on Alexander's strategies. Perhaps the most fascinating aspect of Alexander was his humanity. Despite his godlike status, he showed touching moments of vulnerability. He personally inspected his soldiers' wounds after battles. When water was scarce in the desert, he poured out his own share in front of his troops, refusing to drink when they couldn't. His relationship with Hephaestion, his closest friend since childhood, revealed his capacity for deep personal bonds. When Hephaestion died, Alexander's grief was so profound that he crucified the physician who failed to save him and ordered all horses and mules in his empire to be shorn in mourning. But there's something even more fascinating about Alexander's story that historians rarely discuss. Recent discoveries in Afghanistan suggest that his influence reached far beyond what we previously thought. In fact, evidence shows that his military techniques were still being used in Asia nearly 1,000 years after his death, but that's a story for another time. If you're passionate about uncovering hidden truths, fascinating civilizations, and the stories that shaped humanity, make sure to subscribe and join us for more journeys through time. Your army is in shambles. You've just lost 500,000 men in a catastrophic Russian campaign. All of Europe is united against you. Most leaders would surrender, but not Napoleon Bonaparte. In the next few minutes, you'll discover how one of history's greatest commanders turned his darkest moment into a stunning comeback that shocked the world. The year was 1813. Napoleon had just retreated from Moscow in what historians call the most disastrous military campaign in history. But what happened next would prove why Napoleon wasn't just another general. He was a master of turning defeat into victory. Let's rewind 6 months before this moment. Napoleon's Grande Armée lay frozen across the Russian landscape. 500,000 men had marched into Russia. Only 20,000 stumbled back. Europe celebrated. They thought the French emperor was finished. Austria, Prussia, and Russia formed an alliance to crush what remained of French power. They called themselves the Sixth Coalition, but they made one crucial mistake. They gave Napoleon time to think. Within just 100 days of returning to Paris, Napoleon did something unprecedented. He raised a new army of 350,000 men from scratch. How? He unleashed a propaganda campaign that turned his defeat into a story of heroic sacrifice. He portrayed the Russian campaign not as a failure, but as a battle against nature itself. The French people rallied behind him. It would have paralyzed most leaders. His new soldiers were inexperienced, his best veterans lay buried in Russian snow. The coalition armies outnumbered him 2-1. Traditional military wisdom said he should play defense. Napoleon chose to do the opposite. This is where Napoleon's genius truly shined. While his enemies expected him to cower behind France's borders, he was already planning his next move. He understood something that modern leaders still struggle with today. Momentum isn't just about moving forward. It's about moving forward faster than your opponents can react. In April 1813, he launched a lightning campaign into Germany. His strategy? Use speed and surprise to defeat his enemies before they could unite their forces. At the Battle of Lutzen, he proved that defeat hadn't dulled his genius. With an army of rookies, he outmaneuvered veteran coalition forces and scored a stunning victory. The battle itself was a masterclass in tactical innovation. Lacking experienced cavalry, Napoleon created new infantry formations that could both attack and defend. He positioned his artillery in ways that had never been seen before, using concentrated firepower to make up for his army's inexperience. But here's where it gets interesting. Napoleon's response to victory reveals a crucial lesson about turning defeat into triumph. Instead of celebrating, he immediately identified his army's weaknesses. His new cavalry was too green. His infantry needed better training. While others might have become overconfident, Napoleon used success to prepare for greater challenges. This leads us to one of the most remarkable aspects of Napoleon's comeback, his psychological warfare. After each victory, he sent letters to enemy commanders, not to boast, but to plant seeds of doubt. He reminded them of his past triumphs. He hinted at secret strategies and reinforcements that didn't exist. Many coalition generals began to second-guess their plans, giving Napoleon the initiative. But psychological warfare wasn't just about mind games. Napoleon understood that perception shapes reality. He started spreading rumors about massive French reinforcements marching from Spain. He had his agents plant false intelligence about secret weapon developments. The coalition commanders became increasingly paranoid, seeing French threats everywhere they looked. This psychological pressure had real military consequences. Coalition armies began to move more cautiously. Giving Napoleon the time he needed to train his new forces, they spread their forces too thin, trying to guard against attacks that would never come. In essence, Napoleon turned their own fears into a weapon against them. The culmination came at Dresden in August 1813. The coalition armies thought they had Napoleon trapped. They had 200,000 men to his 120,000. They attacked from multiple directions, confident in their superior numbers. What they didn't know was that Napoleon had been studying their movements for weeks. He noticed their commanders were afraid to attack him directly. He used this fear to position his forces perfectly. When the coalition finally moved in for the kill, Napoleon sprung his trap. The Battle of Dresden became his masterpiece of defensive-offensive warfare. He let the coalition armies advance, then struck their flanks with devastating force. In 2 days of fighting, he inflicted 38,000 casualties while losing only 10,000 men. He had turned his enemies' confidence into their weakness. Let's break down exactly how Napoleon achieved this. First, he positioned his forces to appear weaker than they were. He deliberately left gaps in his lines, tempting the coalition to advance. When they took the bait, he had hidden artillery batteries open fire from elevated positions, creating chaos in their ranks. Second, he used the weather to his advantage. Heavy rain had made the ground muddy, slowing the coalition's movement. Napoleon had studied the terrain weeks in advance and knew exactly where the mud would be deepest. He positioned his forces on firmer ground, giving them a crucial mobility advantage. Third, he employed psychological warfare even during the battle itself. He ordered periodic cavalry charges that weren't meant to break through. They were designed to make the coalition commanders nervous about their flanks. This forced them to hold reserves back, reducing their attacking power. But Napoleon's comeback teaches us something deeper than military strategy. It reveals 3 principles anyone can use to transform defeat into victory. Never waste a crisis. Napoleon used his Russian defeat to rebuild his army from the ground up, fixing problems that success had hidden. He didn't just replace what was lost, he created something better. Speed beats perfection. Instead of waiting until everything was perfect, Napoleon moved fast and adapted on the fly. He understood that in any competitive situation, perfect timing rarely exists. The key is to act decisively with the resources you have. Turn weaknesses into strengths. His young army lacked experience, so he designed strategies that used their energy and enthusiasm instead of veteran skill. He didn't try to make his new army fight like his old one. He created new tactics that played to their unique advantages. These principles worked for Napoleon in 1813, and they can work for you today, whether you're facing a business setback, a personal challenge, or any other kind of defeat. Remember, the size of your comeback isn't determined by the size of your setback, it's determined by how you respond to it. Consider this: every great achievement in history has been preceded by a moment of crisis. Steve Jobs was fired from Apple before returning to make it the world's most valuable company. Walt Disney was fired from a newspaper for lacking imagination before revolutionizing entertainment. Thomas Edison failed thousands of times before inventing the light bulb. Napoleon's story teaches us that defeat isn't the end, it's often just the beginning. When you're knocked down, you have a choice. Stay down or use the fall to learn how to rise stronger. The difference between history's greatest comebacks and forgotten failures isn't resources, luck, or talent. It's the ability to see opportunity in disaster. But here's the thing about Napoleon's comeback that most people don't know. Even as he celebrated his victory at Dresden, he was already planning his next move because he understood something crucial about turning defeat into victory. It's not the comeback that matters. It's what you do next. Imagine facing an impossible enemy, outnumbered, outgunned, with certain death staring you in the face. Would you stand your ground? Leonidas and 300 Spartan warriors did more than stand. They became the definition of courage that would echo through centuries, transforming a potential defeat into one of history's most legendary last stands. Long before Leonidas was born, Sparta emerged as a revolutionary social experiment. While other Greek city-states developed complex cultural and artistic traditions, Sparta created something entirely different, a society entirely dedicated to military excellence. The roots of Spartan culture trace back to the legendary lawgiver Lycurgus, who transformed Sparta from a typical Greek city-state into a militaristic powerhouse. His radical reforms touched every aspect of Spartan life. Gone were the pursuits of wealth, individual achievement, and personal comfort. In their place, he established a system that valued collective strength, discipline, and unwavering commitment to the state. Sparta conquered the neighboring region of Messenia, reducing its population to helots, essentially state-owned slaves who performed all agricultural and economic labor. This allowed Spartan males to focus entirely on military training. Every Spartan citizen became a professional soldier, dedicated to nothing but warfare and state service. The Spartan approach to human development began at birth with a process as brutal as it was systematic. Newborn infants were brought before state elders for a ruthless initial assessment. Each child was examined for physical strength, potential developmental indicators, and signs of future military capability. Weak or deformed infants faced a horrific fate. They were taken to a location near Sparta called the Apothetai, a steep cliff where unfit children were abandoned, left to die from exposure. This wasn't cruelty in the modern sense, but a cold calculation that only the strongest should survive to serve the state. Those deemed strong enough entered the most intense training system in human history. The goal wasn't just to create soldiers, but to transform human beings into living weapons. At 7 years old, male children were forcibly removed from their families and entered the agoge, a training system that would systematically destroy individual identity and forge absolute collective loyalty. Imagine children surviving with minimal clothing in freezing mountain conditions. They were taught to endure extreme hunger, suppress individual pain, and view personal survival as secondary to collective military success. Daily training included wrestling, weapons combat, stealth techniques, and survival skills that would break most adult athletes. Stealing was not just permitted, but strategically encouraged. Boys learned to acquire food through cunning, with one critical lesson: they were punished severely not for stealing, but for being caught. This was a profound lesson in strategic thinking, teaching that execution and success matter more than intention. Leonidas's path to leadership was extraordinary. Born into the royal Agiad line, he wasn't guaranteed kingship. Sparta's revolutionary political structure meant leadership was earned through demonstrable merit, not inherited privilege. While other societies celebrated individual heroism, Sparta viewed the collective as supreme. Leonidas embodied this philosophy perfectly. He wasn't just physically exceptional. He demonstrated strategic intelligence, unwavering discipline, and a profound commitment to Spartan ideals of collective survival and honor. His training transcended physical prowess. Spartan leaders were expected to be philosopher warriors, understanding not just combat techniques, but the psychological and strategic dimensions of conflict. By 480 BCE, the Persian Empire under King Xerxes represented an unprecedented military force. This was more than an invasion, it was a potential extinction event for Greek civilization. The Persians didn't simply want to conquer. They sought to completely erase Greek culture, traditions, and existence. Historians estimate the Persian army between 100,000 to 300,000 soldiers, a massive multicultural war machine that had systematically conquered territories across multiple continents. Their army included warriors from dozens of conquered nations, each bringing unique weapons, tactics, and cultural fighting styles. Against this overwhelming force, the Greek city-states seemed hopelessly outmatched, but Leonidas saw an opportunity to transform certain defeat into a legendary stand that would inspire generations. Thermopylae, meaning hot gates, was a geographical masterpiece. This narrow mountain pass would transform the Persians' numerical superiority into a fatal weakness. Imagine a natural bottleneck where tens of thousands of soldiers become a hindrance rather than an advantage. Leonidas brought 300 Spartan warriors, accompanied by approximately 7,000 other Greek allies. Each soldier was meticulously selected. Each understood the near-certain probability of death, and each was prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. The Battle of Thermopylae was a masterclass in tactical defense. The narrow pass, only about 50 feet wide, transformed the Greeks' numerical disadvantage into a strategic advantage. Leonidas positioned his forces precisely, using the mountain's steep slopes and the narrow terrain to nullify the Persians' overwhelming numbers. The Spartan phalanx was a military innovation that represented the pinnacle of ancient warfare tactics. Warriors stood shoulder to shoulder, their large shields, called hopla, overlapping to create an almost impenetrable wall. Each shield protected not just the individual soldier, but also the warrior to his left. This meant survival depended on collective discipline. A single broken line could mean total destruction. Each Spartan warrior carried a long spear called a dory, typically 7 to 9 feet long. The first few rows of the phalanx would extend their spears forward, creating a deadly forest of sharp points that would impale any charging enemy before they could reach the main line. Behind these forward rows, additional warriors stood ready to rotate forward, ensuring a constant stream of fresh, lethal resistance. The Persian assault waves were relentless but futile. King Xerxes initially believed his massive army would overwhelm the Greeks quickly. He sent wave after wave of troops, first lighter armed troops, then his elite Persian immortals. But each assault broke against the Spartan formation like waves against a rocky coastline. Leonidas's leadership was extraordinary. Unlike most ancient commanders who directed battles from a safe rear position, he fought in the front ranks. He wore the same heavy armor as his men, carried the same weapons, and faced the same mortal danger. This wasn't just symbolic, it was a fundamental aspect of Spartan leadership philosophy. A leader who wouldn't ask his men to do something he wouldn't do himself was considered no leader at all. The psychological warfare was as critical as the physical combat. The Spartans' reputation preceded them. Many Persian troops had heard stories of Spartan warriors, their discipline, their training, their absolute commitment to victory or death. This reputation created a level of psychological intimidation that was as powerful as their physical prowess. Each day of the battle followed a similar pattern. Persian waves would crash against the Greek defensive line, only to be systematically cut down. The Greeks would rotate their front-line fighters, ensuring that tired warriors could step back and recover while fresh soldiers maintained the defensive wall. By the battle's third day, the Persians had lost thousands of troops. The ground before the Greek position was littered with bodies, a gruesome testament to the effectiveness of their tactics and resolve. When a local Greek named Ephialtes betrayed their position by revealing a mountain path that would allow the Persians to attack from behind, Leonidas faced an impossible choice. Knowing total defeat was imminent, he made a decision that would transform potential massacre into an immortal legend. He dismissed most of the Greek allies, keeping only his 300 Spartans and 700 Thespian volunteers who refused to abandon him. These men would become a sacrificial rearguard, buying time for the rest of Greece to prepare and ultimately resist the Persian invasion. As the last Spartan fell, pierced by countless Persian arrows, they didn't just die. They became a message, a warning, a testament that true strength isn't about survival. It's about standing for something greater than yourself. Would you have the courage to make the same choice, to sacrifice everything to protect something larger than yourself? The story of Leonidas isn't just history. It's a blueprint of leadership that transcends time, a reminder that true power comes not from numbers but from unwavering commitment. Imagine a world where one man's vision could transform entire civilizations, a leader so extraordinary that even his enemies called him the Father, a ruler who would rewrite the rules of conquest, compassion, and empire building forever. This is the untold story of Cyrus the Great, the man who did what no one thought possible. The story of Cyrus begins in a time of chaos and constant conflict. Ancient Persia was a land of warring tribes, harsh landscapes, and seemingly insurmountable challenges. But in this unforgiving environment, a legend was about to be born. To truly understand Cyrus, we must first understand the world he was born into. The late 7th century BCE was a time of constant conflict and fragmentation. Empires rose and fell like waves, with each civilization fighting for supremacy. The Assyrian Empire had dominated the region for centuries, known for its brutal conquest and merciless treatment of defeated peoples, but the Persian civilization was different. Nestled in the rugged mountainous regions of what is now Iran, the Persian tribes were known for their resilience, their horsemanship, and their complex tribal structures. They were warriors, but not just warriors of conquest. They were strategists, philosophers, and innovators. According to ancient historians, Cyrus's early life was shrouded in mystery and prophecy. Legend tells of a dream his grandfather had before Cyrus's birth, a dream that predicted the child would become a great king who would challenge the existing world order. Some historians believe Cyrus was born around 600 BCE in the mountainous regions of what is now modern-day Iran to a Persian father and a Median mother. Cyrus's lineage was particularly unique. His grandfather, Astyages, was the king of the Median Empire, one of the most powerful kingdoms of the time. His mother was a Median princess and his father was a Persian prince. This mixed heritage would prove crucial in his later ability to unite different cultures and tribes. The Persian social structure was also revolutionary for its time. Unlike many ancient societies that were rigidly hierarchical, Persians had a more fluid system of social mobility. Merit was often valued over birthright, and talented individuals could rise through the ranks based on their skills and achievements. Cyrus understood this principle intrinsically. As a young leader, he didn't just rely on his royal blood, he worked to earn the respect of his people, learning from tribal elders, studying military strategies, and developing a deep understanding of diplomacy that was rare for his era. His military training was comprehensive. Persian princes weren't just taught how to fight. They were educated in philosophy, languages, governance, and strategic thinking. Cyrus could speak multiple languages, understand different cultural nuances, and adapt his approach based on the specific context of each conquest. But Cyrus was no ordinary prince. While most royal heirs were content with luxury and inherited power, he was different. From a young age, he demonstrated an unusual combination of military brilliance, political wisdom, and unprecedented empathy. These qualities would become the cornerstone of his revolutionary approach to leadership. The technological innovations of the Persian Empire under Cyrus were equally impressive. Their metallurgy was advanced for the time, allowing them to create superior weapons and armor. Their horse breeding and cavalry techniques were unparalleled, giving them a significant advantage in warfare. Communication was another area where Persians were centuries ahead. The royal road system wasn't just a highway, it was a sophisticated network of relay stations, messengers, and strategic points that allowed rapid communication across vast distances. Imagine a messaging system that could transmit information across thousands of miles in days when most civilizations struggled to communicate within their own territories. His rise to power wasn't just about military conquest, it was about vision and strategy. When Cyrus first began to unite the Persian tribes, many thought he was mad. The Persian people were divided with multiple tribal leaders fighting for supremacy. But Cyrus saw something they didn't: the potential for unity. His first major conquest came against the Median Empire, ruled by his own grandfather. Instead of a bloody battle that would destroy everything, Cyrus orchestrated a bloodless revolution. He united the Median and Persian armies, creating a force more powerful than anyone had imagined. This wasn't just a military victory. It was a masterclass in diplomacy and strategic thinking. The conquest of Lydia marked another turning point. King Croesus, famous for his immense wealth, believed his golden treasures and powerful army would protect him. Cyrus had other plans. Using an innovative military strategy, he crossed terrain that was considered impossible, surprising Croesus and capturing his capital. But true to his philosophy, he didn't destroy the conquered kingdom. He integrated it. Cyrus's approach to conquest was revolutionary. While other conquerors sought to crush and humiliate, he sought to understand and incorporate. When he conquered a new territory, he would often adopt local customs, respect local religions, and even employ local officials. This wasn't just strategy, it was a fundamentally different way of building an empire. The Cyrus cylinder, discovered in 1879 and now housed in the British Museum, provides incredible insight into his philosophy. Often called the first human rights charter, this clay cylinder outlined principles of racial, cultural, and religious tolerance that were centuries ahead of their time. Cyrus declared that all peoples within his empire had the right to practice their own religions, speak their own languages, and maintain their cultural practices. Consider the conquest of Babylon in 539 BCE, a moment that would change world history forever. Instead of the typical brutal siege, Cyrus entered the city peacefully. He freed the Jewish people who had been held captive, allowing them to return to their homeland and rebuild their temple. This act was so significant that he is actually mentioned positively in the Bible, a rare honor for a non-Jewish ruler. This infrastructure wasn't just military, it was economic and cultural. Trade flourished under Cyrus's rule. Merchants from different regions could travel safely, exchange goods, and interact in ways that were previously impossible. The Persian Empire became a melting pot of ideas, technologies, and cultural exchanges. Cyrus's religious tolerance was also groundbreaking. In an era when most rulers imposed their own religious beliefs on conquered peoples, he allowed diverse religious practices. Jews, Babylonians, Egyptians, and dozens of other cultural groups were allowed to maintain their spiritual traditions. His empire wasn't just large, it was massive beyond comprehension. Stretching over 2 million square miles, it covered territories from modern-day Turkey to India, from Egypt to Central Asia. But Cyrus understood that an empire isn't just about territory, it's about connection. The Persian Royal Road was a testament to his genius. This incredible highway system, stretching thousands of miles, allowed for unprecedented communication and movement. Relay stations were placed at strategic points, allowing messages and goods to travel faster than ever before. Imagine a communication network that could transmit information across continents in a matter of days, in an era when most civilizations struggled to communicate within their own borders. But Cyrus's most remarkable achievement was creating the first truly multinational state in human history. He didn't just conquer, he integrated. Persians, Babylonians, Jews, Egyptians, and dozens of other cultures and peoples were not just conquered, but welcomed into a unified system that respected their differences. Yet, for all his brilliance, Cyrus carried a secret. A fatal flaw that would ultimately lead to the most dramatic transformation in ancient history. How could a leader so advanced, so revolutionary, plant the seeds of his own empire's eventual destruction? The answer will shock you. Some legends are born, some are made, but some change everything. Imagine an empire that emerged from the harshest landscape on Earth, transforming from a collection of warring tribes to the largest contiguous land empire in human history. This is the extraordinary story of Genghis Khan, a name that would reshape the world in ways no one could have predicted. The Mongolian steppe was never a place for the weak. Stretching across an endless horizon of windswept grasslands, this unforgiving landscape was a crucible of human survival. Here, temperatures could plummet to -40 degrees in winter and soar to scorching heat in summer. Only the most resilient could survive, and from this environment emerged the most remarkable military force in human history. Long before Genghis Khan became a legendary conqueror, the Mongolian tribes were locked in a seemingly endless cycle of conflict. Tribes like the Tatars, Karaites, Naimans, and Mongols constantly fought for limited resources. Water, grazing lands, and survival were constant struggles. Each tribe was a world unto itself, with complex social structures and deep-rooted rivalries that seemed impossible to overcome. Temujin's early life was a testament to human resilience. Born around 1162, he was not born into privilege, but into a world of constant danger. His father, a tribal chief, was murdered when Temujin was just 9 years old. Suddenly, his family was cast out, reduced to survival on the margins of tribal society. Imagine being a child in this harsh environment, where each day was a battle for survival. The young Temujin experienced slavery, poverty, and the constant threat of death. He was captured and enslaved by a rival clan, experiencing humiliation and hardship that would have broken most people. But these challenges didn't destroy him. They forged him into a strategic mastermind. His first revolutionary concept was meritocracy, a radical departure from the inherited leadership of most medieval societies. While other kingdoms relied on bloodlines and aristocratic privilege, Temujin promoted people based on skill, loyalty, and performance. A soldier could rise through the ranks based on talent, not family name. This was revolutionary in a world where social mobility was virtually non-existent. The Mongol military was a machine of unprecedented sophistication. Their horses were smaller than European war horses, but incredibly resilient. A Mongol warrior could ride for days, carrying minimal supplies, moving with a speed and flexibility that seemed almost supernatural to their enemies. They could cover up to 100 miles per day, a distance that would take other armies weeks. Their archery skills were legendary. Mongol warriors could shoot arrows with devastating accuracy while riding at full gallop, a technique called the Parthian shot. Their composite bows, crafted from layers of wood, bone, and sinew, could shoot further and with more power than any contemporary weapon. A skilled archer could hit a target accurately from hundreds of yards away while moving at full speed. The Battle of the Khalkha River in 1223 would become a legendary example of Mongol military brilliance. Imagine a crisp morning in what is now Ukraine, where a massive Russian and Kipchak army stood confident, outnumbering the Mongol forces nearly 3-1. The Russian princes, led by Mstislav the Bold and Mstislav of Chernigov, believed their superior numbers guaranteed victory. The Mongol force, led by Subutai and Jabi, two of Genghis Khan's most brilliant generals, appeared to be retreating. But this was no ordinary retreat. It was a calculated trap that would become a masterclass in military deception. As the Russian army pursued what they believed was a fleeing enemy, the Mongols executed a strategy that would become legendary. Their light cavalry moved with impossible speed and precision. Mounted on small, agile horses, the Mongol warriors could change direction in an instant. They would fire volleys of arrows while seemingly running away, a technique that confused and demoralized their enemies. Each arrow found its mark with terrifying accuracy, while the Russian heavy cavalry struggled to maintain formation. The battlefield became a deadly dance. The Mongols would draw the Russian forces into narrow, carefully selected terrain. Steep river banks and strategic high ground became their ally. Where other armies saw obstacles, the Mongols saw opportunities for tactical advantage. By midday, the Russian army was in complete disarray. Their heavy armor, once considered an advantage, became a fatal burden. Mongol warriors darted between formations, striking with precision and speed that seemed almost supernatural. The Russian princes watched in horror as their seemingly invincible army was systematically dismantled. When the battle concluded, the scale of destruction was unprecedented. Thousands of Russian soldiers lay dead with minimal Mongol casualties. The Russian princes were captured and executed in a manner that would become part of Mongol legend, rolled up in carpets and trampled by horses, ensuring they would not be touched by blood, a superstitious practice that avoided direct contact with royal blood. This single battle was more than a military victory. It was a message to the world. The Mongols were not just another conquering army. They were a force that could transform warfare itself, using intelligence, speed, and psychological warfare in ways no one had ever seen before. Communication was another key to their success. The YAM system was the world's first sophisticated international communication network. Imagine a relay of horse-mounted messengers that could transmit information across thousands of miles faster than any civilization had ever done. Messages that would have taken months could now be delivered in days, creating an unprecedented level of coordination. Religious tolerance was another remarkable aspect of the Mongol Empire. While European kingdoms were engaged in religious wars, the Mongols practiced a form of religious freedom centuries ahead of their time. They believed different spiritual paths could coexist, understanding that diversity could be a strength, not a weakness. The economic impact was equally staggering. The Silk Road, which had existed for centuries, was transformed under Mongol control. Merchants could now travel thousands of miles with unprecedented safety. Ideas, technologies, and cultures flowed more freely than ever before. Silk from China, spices from India, ceramics, silver, and gold could now move across continents with ease. Their legal system, the Yasa, was sophisticated and progressive. It established clear rules about property, prohibited stealing, and created a meritocratic system where anyone could rise based on their abilities. This was radical for a time when most societies were rigidly hierarchical. By the time of Genghis Khan's death, the Mongol Empire covered more continuous land than any empire in human history. At its peak, it stretched from the Pacific Ocean to Eastern Europe, encompassing nearly 24 million square kilometers. To put this in perspective, this was larger than the entire African continent. Genetic studies have revealed an astonishing fact. Approximately 16 million men alive today are direct descendants of Genghis Khan. This isn't just a historical footnote, it's a testament to the massive demographic impact of the Mongol conquests. But perhaps the most extraordinary aspect of the Mongol Empire was not its size, but its lasting impact on human civilization. They didn't just conquer, they connected. They created the first truly global network, breaking down cultural barriers and facilitating an unprecedented exchange of ideas, technologies, and human potential.